Welcome back, everyone. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone at xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV. And to find out about the programming we have available for you on the radio side on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit www.xzbn.net. Now, if you're a subscriber to Simul TV and you watch the X Zone TV channel, www.simultv.com. My guest this hour, X Zone Nation, is a gentleman that I wave to when I'm on the shores of Lake Erie. He's in Pennsylvania, and I didn't know it was Ron until before. I just used to go down to Lake Erie and wave, and I'd see somebody wave back. And just find out it's Ron Murphy. He's an investigator into all things that go bump in the night. He uses a multidisciplinary approach to delving into the stuff of nightmares and illuminating the archetype that lurks in the shadows. I think I went out with her for a couple of nights in high school, but that's another story. He's written 8 books on the paranormal and has investigated throughout the United States as well as the United Kingdom. Joining me now from his home in Pennsylvania, our guest this hour, Ron Murphy. And Ron, welcome to the X Zone. Great having you with us.
Rob, thank you so much. It's a pleasure's all mine, my friend.
Okay. How did you get involved in the paranormal?
Well, actually, it was my mom, if you can believe it. Back in the 1970s, I was just a wee lad, so I was in elementary school. I was probably about 7 years old in 1977, and we had a rash of Bigfoot sightings in our area. Now, I come from a very small town, about 35 miles outside of Pittsburgh, but it's like one of these one streetlight towns, and it's really, known for nothing until Bigfoot started to be seen on the outskirts of town. And then the media started to come in. News trucks from Pittsburgh started to come in to our little town, all because of Bigfoot. So my mother, she would take my brother and I, and we would listen to the radio reports, and we would listen to the TV reports and read the reports in the newspapers. And then she would plot out an area where we would go investigate to see if we could find any traces of Bigfoot. So from a very early age, about the age of 6 or 7, I was out looking for this elusive mythological creature in a lot of people's minds, but flesh and blood creature in many other people's minds as well. But she instilled in me that sense of that the world is much bigger and much more mysterious than it seems to be.
Ron, why do you think in the year 2018 more and more people are getting more interested in the search for Bigfoot, whereas other aspects of the paranormal, and I'm talking about ufology and the investigation into the ghosts and hauntings, are on a decline?
You know what? That's an excellent question. And thinking about it from a paranormal perspective, from somebody that is a true fan of the paranormal, I think it's because Bigfoot rest outside of technological bounds.
Right.
Science has not categorized it. It represents that wildness, that uncivilized part of humanity that we might never be able to tame. Now, whenever we talk about UFOs, that's a very technological thing, isn't it?
Yes.
We're talking about computers. We're talking about things that are able to travel through time and space. And it's not that wildness and that nearness and that we can very easily identify with a wild man character other than something that came light years away, or even for ghosts for that matter. I think we've been so inundated in the media concerning ghosts and hauntings that we've kind of lost our nerve for it.
Right.
And I think Bigfoot is one of those things that people really kind of grasp onto, and they hope, and I hope that there is something out there.
I was just going to say, is it possible that because with Bigfoot, there is a better chance of someone actually seeing a Bigfoot than there is of a UFO and a ghost?
I think that, well, it's also very tangible too,
right,
isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, ghosts are always going to be these ephemeral things. No matter if we catch EVPs or fleeting videotape, it's always going to be something that's very subjective to the witness. But whenever we have a Bigfoot, it's something that leaves tracks. It's something that people identify with smell, and it's something that we can actually reach out and grasp hold of.
Is it also possible that there is the possibility that Bigfoot is related to us humans, and that he has evaded detection over the years, making him kind of a not only a legend but a feasible reality.
Yeah, Rob, and that is also another good point, and that's the reason why whenever I write and I approach the subject
Mm-hmm.
of the paranormal, that I like to look at archetypes, because it really is embroidered in our DNA as a human race that these wild man creatures exist right on the periphery of civilization. All cultures around the world, whether we're talking about Africa or Australia or Europe or Asia, we all have the idea and the belief in a wild man character. And that says a lot for who we are as human beings. I think that we need them as much as they need us. I think I kind of lost track on your point, but I'm sorry if you would be kind enough to repeat it, because I was going off on this tangent. I thought, I'm going to make a real good point about this, and then I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, first of all, you did make a very good point, and I was just saying that is it possible that because there's the distinct possibility that we are related to Bigfoot, that this is where another attachment to the phenomena comes in?
Right. See, now this is where I'm going to plug my book, and that's
Go
probably
right
why
ahead.
I'm not very good with self-promotion, but I wrote a book called on Wild Man, Tracking the Bigfoot Through History, and it's just been re-released in its second edition, an expanded edition, and I point out in the book that the idea of interspecies breeding is something that we as a human race did experience.
Yes, that's right.
About 50,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're talking about there are human beings in this world that have not only Neanderthal DNA in them, but also Denisovan DNA, which is this other kind of Homo sapien dead end that nature kind of played around with and experimented with, and it kind of lost the arms race to us Homo sapiens. So I think that there is this idea that it could be us. I mean, ever since I was a child, I remember watching a TV documentary called Bigfoot, Man or Beast. So ever since I've been a kid, and probably since the time that this legend started to surface among very different Aboriginal cultures, the idea that it could be one of us, a wild one of us, has always been there right below the surface. But you know what? That's something that a lot of people don't want to admit either. That's one of the skeletons in humanity's closet, the idea of inbreeding with a species outside of our own genetic makeup.
But it's a fact of life.
It is a fact of life. About 3% of Europeans have Neanderthal DNA,
yes.
and the percentage of Denisovan DNA is much higher in the Aboriginal Australians of all things, if you can believe it. So the idea that this has happened and lingers with us to this very day is scientific proof.
Scientifically speaking, if Bigfoot is related to we Homo sapiens, why isn't there any protection against people harming Bigfoot in the quest to establish his reality?
Another excellent point. I think one of the reasons is because people don't want to take it seriously. This is a pseudoscience. This is something out on the fringe. I think that there should be something in place, I truly do, just to eliminate a lot of whack jobs from going out in the woods with guns. I think that it would be a great thing. There was a show on our TV down here in the States called Killing Bigfoot. I don't know if you had it up there or not.
Well, we were going to, but I got an online petition going, and the network that was going to air it backed down, and they canceled it.
And that's probably for the best. And to tell you the truth, I mean, it was not... It almost followed the same formula as Finding Bigfoot, except whenever the people went out on their night investigations, they had high-powered rifles. I mean, that was the whole premise of the show, is to kill this creature, that has yet to be even proven by science. I think that if you would put some sort of protective measures in there, just make it simply unlawful to hunt a bipedal creature, that makes complete sense to me. I think there are some places on the books, kind of tongue-in-cheek, where some states have set aside that you cannot do this. I think Texas might be one of those places. But the idea of going out there with a gun to shoot something walking on two legs, whether Bigfoot exists or not, that's an accident waiting to happen.
It sure is. Ron, please stand by. You and I have to take our first break. Exonation, Ron Murphy is our very special guest this hour. If you'd like to contact Ron, find out more about him, his books, whatever, www.ronmurphyjr.com. That's ronmurphyjr.com. And we'll both be back on the other side of this break, continuing this hour talking about Bigfoot here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away. Ron Murphy's my guest this hour, www.ronmurphyjr.com. And Ron, why is it that the Bigfoot hunters or the Bigfoot researchers that we see on television always go out at night? Doesn't Bigfoot move around during the day?
I'll look at the Patterson-Gimlin film. I mean,
Yeah,
that was in broad daylight. It makes for better video. I think it gives that kind of creepy aspect. But if you're looking for a creature out there, it doesn't matter if it's day or night.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of that it might be migratory at night. The idea that this is nocturnal, first of all, should be thrown out, because all credible sightings usually take place in the daytime. That's what makes them so credible, is because there's no identification or misidentification or eyewitness mistake on what they're seeing. So yeah, the idea of going out there at night is completely foolhardy for me.
We were talking earlier about this TV show where the guys were going out with high-powered rifles, and I agree with you. It's an accident waiting to happen, especially at night. But what do we know about Bigfoot itself? What do we know about his social structure? What do we know about Bigfoot as a mom or a dad?
That's and that's another point. I mean, whenever we're talking about this from a scientific perspective,
Mm-hmm.
all this stuff has to be addressed. Is there a mating season?
Yes.
Do they go off into bachelor groups like some great apes do? What exactly is going on here? I would think from a investigative perspective that a group of Bigfoot is very rarely seen at one time, so they apparently move around in very disjointed bands or family bands or whatever, if we have to make that kind of speculation. Of course, that's what we're doing here, is having a speculation. But there are reports from around where I live right now, dating back into the 1950s, of Bigfoot being seen with young ones. And every now and then you do hear reports of seeing a Bigfoot with a single young child. That's usually the way it goes.
Right.
I've never heard of report of multiple young ones regarding Bigfoot. So with that being said, is it possible that there are very, very few of these creatures? And that's what I am proposing. When we look at the great ape species, there's only about 800 mountain gorillas left. And if you would look at this biologically, the minimal viable population for the mountain gorilla is somewhere around 500 individuals before they start becoming, genetic mishaps and things like that, deformities and dysfunctions. So is it possible that possibly all of North America only has 800 of these animals? I mean, if that is the case, it's going to be very difficult to ever capture one of these things. They might be migratory. They might come together only certain times of the year for mating purposes. That could all be done with the use of pheromones as trail markers, so we can actually gather these creatures together over vast differences by using very subtle biological components like infrasound or pheromones, and the idea of seeing these creatures together is really limited if they only do, in fact, come together just once or twice a year for certain mating rituals. And so it's very possible that we're talking about only 1,000 individuals over North and South America and possibly even into Canada. And if that is the case, it's going to be very difficult to ever find one.
The fact that most of the sightings, or the majority of sightings with smaller ones, is a parent and one child, also is a connection to the hypothesis that Bigfoot is related to Homo sapiens.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So we're not talking about them having a litter,
right?
The other thing, there might be other Bigfoot in the area as well too. There might be a sentinel or something on the lookout. So we really don't know what the family makeup is.
Right.
We can only say that they are, if these are indeed related to the great apes and related to us, we have to look at what nature is providing us with. To study. So we would look at the great apes and say, well, this is how they kind of go about the business, but they're very social creatures. So if we do have a social group of Bigfoot, they keep their numbers hidden quite well.
Isn't that why it is possible that Bigfoot has been able to survive as an unknown species, is because of the care it takes in not socializing and getting out there where it can be seen and further exploited?
Oh, absolutely. If you look through historical accounts of Bigfoot, and I'm not just talking about accounts that are after the Patterson-Gimlin film,
right,
or scant reports here and there about wild men being seen in the forest by trappers. But if we go back into antiquity and we look at reports like the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is from Samaria, a report about a Bigfoot-like creature. These creatures are only encountered when the civilized man goes into the uncivilized world and starts mucking it up, starts cutting down trees and things. You can go through time and see that this is what's going on. There's an invasion of territory, and there is some sort of reaction from these creatures. So if they did indeed evolve alongside of us, they would know by this time that we are to be avoided, and if that is the case, and they are self-aware creatures. So any creature like this that is able to be this elusive has to be self-aware. It has to know that it needs to stay hidden in order to survive. Then you could also talk about a culture. It's very possible these creatures are to the point that they have harnessed some sort of culture. They might not have fire or any kind of high functioning tool system or anything like that, but they may have a culture that involves some sort of burial even. So whenever we talk about this kind of animal from a very speculative angle, then we can see how it almost like layers of an onion, how more and more difficult it may be to ever categorize this creature.
Where is your favorite place to investigate when you're out there looking for Bigfoot?
I do a lot of stuff on the Chestnut Ridge. My first book that I wrote on the paranormal was called The Unexplained World of the Chestnut Ridge, a hike into the Goblin Universe of Western Pennsylvania. Now, this is a place where there's not only numerous Bigfoot sightings, but also UFOs, plenty of haunted locations along that area. Even some stretches of the land itself is considered to be haunted. Thunderbird, Dogman, really anything that you can name that is beyond the realm of reality is there. This is almost like the rabbit hole in Alice in Wonderland. Back since the 1970s, it's been called the Twilight Zone of Pennsylvania. So this is one of my favorite places to investigate. One of the reasons is if I look out my window, I can actually see it out my window. I've lived in the foothills of the Chestnut Ridge for 40 years of my 48 years here on this earth. But the other place, if I'm ever in Europe, and I haven't been there for a bit, but I need to get back, is in the Highlands of Scotland. They have a very interesting creature over there called the Gray Man, which is their version of a Bigfoot type creature. A little bit more paranormal and a little bit more metaphysical in appearance and aspect. It seems to be very nebulous. It can kind of shrink itself or grow into tremendous sizes. But the legend at its basis is this bipedal wild creature that haunts the Highlands of Scotland. And also there's a lot of different wild tracks throughout England where the woodwoose is said to be hiding, and that is really the wild man where we get our our idea of the wild man figure before the Patterson-Gimlin film came from this European tradition.
Where do you, based on the research that you've done into the Bigfoot, where do you think the Bigfoot originates from?
Oh my goodness! I think that if we're talking about this from a purely scientific point of view, we would have to talk about an out of Africa migration. I think that if we're going to say that this is indeed an evolutionary dead end, remnant population that was able to live into history. An out of Africa movement, and we have had, and one of the reasons why I write about archetypes and from the Jungian perspective is that we probably had a co-evolution with these creatures.
When was the first, once again, based on your experience and the research you've done into the Bigfoot, when was it first found in history, recorded history, and where?
Yep, about 3,500 BC. So we're talking. This is before the pyramids are built, actually. So we're talking, the ancient Sumerian culture.
Wow.
We have the Epic of Gilgamesh, and this is whenever the cultural hero Gilgamesh goes out and discovers a wild creature called Enkidu, and it's not the only wild creature out there, because in their adventures, Gilgamesh and Enkidu end up going to a grove of trees. Now, you have to understand that this part of the world is very barren. So anytime you come to a large gathering of trees, that's considered a sacred grove. But it had an inhabitant, and that inhabitant was another one of these wild bipedal creatures. And Gilgamesh promptly slays that creature and starts tearing down the forest. So as you can see, from the very first encounter, it's never been a good one for these creatures.
All right, Ron, please stand by. You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Exonation, Ron Murphy's our very special guest. And Ron has written 8 books on the paranormal and has investigated throughout the United States and the United Kingdom. His website is www.ronmurphyjr.com, and we'll be back on the other side of this news break as we continue here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, and my special guest this hour, Ron Murphy, from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Whatever you do, don't go away. Ron Murphy is my guest, www.ronmurphyjr.com. He's the author of 8 books. We're talking about Bigfoot this hour here in the X Zone. First of all, Ron, thanks very much for joining us. Great having you with us. Congratulations on all the work that you do. And later on, I'd like to talk to you about the course that you're developing that is nearly completed. But right now, I was wondering if you could explain your multidisciplinary approach to the work that you do.
Oh, great. I would love to do that. So I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and I have my bachelor's degree in literature. And then I went to Indiana University of Pennsylvania, where I focused on history. Now, most of the history that I focused on was ancient to medieval, and this is where a lot of these archetypes started to show themselves. When we talk about the art of England, the medieval manuscripts, you had a lot of these wild man characters seen in books of prayer. It's kind of shows you what is out there, the wild, the uncivilized, to stay away from. But through all my courses, from the very beginning of school, I start seeing this creature that I loved so much in my youth emerging again and again. This idea of this dead end in humanity that was considered to become extinct. When we talk about the Gigantopithecus and such, but then I started to try to make connections and think, well, is it possible that there's still populations of these creatures out there and people are still seeing them today? So then you look at sociology and see how that can be applied to that, and how groups, the mob mentality can somehow influence eyewitness sightings, and linguistics. So whenever we look at Native American folk tales of these creatures on the West Coast, and then we see that there's an East Coast equivalent as well, sometimes even linguistically, well, there's something to be said about that. There's some sort of connection to be made.
Definitely.
So whenever we look at all these different things, if we're looking at history and we're looking at literature and we're looking at biology, we can start connecting the dots a little bit better, and we can see that this creature does exist, at least in our minds, in our collective unconscious, if you will. Again, to go back to Carl Jung. So the idea of the collective unconscious is that we, as a human race, a species, have a cultural memory of this being, and it has influenced us so much that it sticks with us to this very day. I like that idea. As an investigator, I'm still out there looking. I still have never seen anything. I've had some anecdotal evidence. I've had some tantalizing things happen to me, like a wood knock and some calls and things, but I've never physically seen this creature. So as an investigator, looking at this creature in the woods is one thing, but also trying to track it through the gray matter of the mind is something completely different, but just as appealing to me.
Well, everybody, I put Bigfoot in the same category as God. Nobody has seen God, yet millions of people around the world believe that God does exist. So why couldn't the same model apply to not only Bigfoot, but other cryptids, as well as other categories within what you and I call the paranormal?
Absolutely, that's the case, isn't it? I mean, a lot of people do see this as a quasi-religion, don't they? I mean, this is something to be defended. There's no way really to disprove anything that we're talking about. Right. It is a matter of subjective faith whenever we're talking about matters of this nature. Of course, we can be as scientific as we possibly can, but in the end of the day, we're not going to be able to take a push pin and tack a Bigfoot under an investigative lens, are we?
Not yet, anyway.
Yes, not yet anyway. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen, because we need that wildness. We need to be kept in our place as a human species to show that we are capable of not destroying something that coexists on this earth with us.
I agree with you, but then I have to ask you, then why search for Bigfoot then?
Well, I think that it's everybody's quest for the Holy Grail. I think everybody has something to do, and mine is to try to get to the source of what has been infecting my dreams since I've been an elementary school student.
Right.
And to other people, I think there's a true scientific quest out there. Some researchers are very religious, getting back to the idea of God, and that can point out this idea of creation over evolution. There's a lot of different reasons why people do it, but I think the ultimate goal is everybody likes a mystery, and everybody wants to be the one to solve that mystery. This is a great puzzle. This is a conundrum that could possibly be walking in the very forest that we look out our window and see. So if that is the case, I think that a lot of people want to solve this mystery for themselves.
Ron, is there a Bigfoot paranormal connection outside of cryptozoology?
See, as a researcher, and this is whenever it becomes a bit more ambiguous.
Okay.
Again, we talk about the idea of a culture, or the idea of them burying their dead, or possibly even ritualistic cannibalism or something of that nature. But we have to go by a lot of eyewitness reports of these things disappearing, of red glowing eyes, of sometimes telepathy. I've had a number of reports of these creatures materializing in somebody's home. I don't know if you've heard any of these stories up there in Canada, Rob, or not, but I've heard at least a handful just in my neck of the woods here in Pennsylvania. One lady said she was vacuuming the floor, and this creature materialized inside her living room, and had to actually bend over because it was so tall, and it communicated with her telepathically. and it would come and go. Observe her doing chores around the house. At first, she was scared out of her mind, but then it became just something that was going on. So, as somebody that has been trained to observe human behavior. I knew that she wasn't making this story up, and she herself believed this story. So you could put it off as some sort of fantasy, something that was going on in her mind, until these stories keep on cropping up. Other people saying, yes, you know what, that had happened to me, or somebody coming out of the blue and saying, have you ever heard of a Bigfoot visiting you inside your home? So whenever we hear these encounters, what are we to make about it? We're still dealing with a very tall, bipedal, hair-covered animal,
Right.
But now it's speaking to us, or it's vanishing, or it's able to manipulate the world around us. That, of course, is a paranormal connection, and it's something as a legitimate researcher that I can't discard it. I can't simply roll it up and toss it in the garbage can because it doesn't fit into my schema on how these things are supposed to operate.
So Bigfoot could be a multi-dimensional, multiverse, could be some sort of entity that has figured out how to manipulate the time-space continuum, travel backward and forward in time. There are so many possibilities. But once again, it goes back to what you were saying, that because we do not know, everything is on the table.
Everything is on the table. So as I'm writing and researching, I come back more and more. And I've said this on very, very few programs. So this will probably be one of the first times that, listeners are hearing this theory. And I would love to hear anything that they would have to say in regards to this, because, these radio shows are great forums for people to get together and share opinions and share theories. But one of my theories that I'm dealing with right now is Bigfoot as a denizen of the world of the Fae, of the fairy realm.
Yes.
Now, a lot of times whenever you use the word fairy,
Right.
you automatically think of Tinkerbell, and Walt Disney comes to mind. But when we talk about an elemental earth energy that exists out there and is able to manipulate the world around it, so we see it. It can actually project itself into us. Now, when we look at medieval reports of fairies, they had something called glamour, which is a way that they can physically change the way they are being seen. So we're talking about some sort of possible psychic connection or something going on there. But they're able to put into our minds a vision of the way that they want to be perceived. And a lot of tells of Bigfoot seem to have that going on there as well. There are also tells in the Pacific Northwest where Bigfoot has offered food, and if you would take the food, you go into the world of Bigfoot. That is something that is also very curiously related to the European folklore, yet it's showing up in Native American legends as well. So, we start connecting dots again, like I said. So when we look at the Yowie in Aboriginal Australia, and that culture is quite ancient. We're going back almost 60,000 years. And we have the idea of the dream time, this time out of time, where certain beings exist, and the Yowie seems to be one of those beings. It looks as if these creatures might be coming and going into our world in possible waves, whether intentional or unintentional, but it seems like they might not be grounded completely in corporeal reality.
So
gives you something to think about, doesn't it?
Yeah, it certainly does. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my final break now while I ponder that very interesting and very plausible situation. Ron Murphy is our very special guest this hour. Exonation, www.ronmurphyjr.com. And if you'd like to find out, where can our listeners get your books, Ron?
You can go to Amazon. You can also go right to my website as well. You can go to your bookstore, but the paranormal sections tend to be getting smaller and smaller unless you're, hunting for vampires or something like that. So you could go to your bookstore and order it, but it's easier to go on Amazon. And if you're a Prime holder, it costs nothing to ship the books, or you can just get them directly from me, and I'd be happy to autograph them or whatever.
All right, we'll be back on the other side of this break. And by the way, that's not a Bigfoot; that's his pussycat on his back. Yeah.
Mr. Pussums.
Mr. Pussums. Ron Murphy and I return. Don't go away. Ron Murphy's our special guest this hour. Exonation, www.ronmurphyjr.com. First of all, Ron, I want to thank you ever so much for joining us. It's been a delight having you with us. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. We're going to have you back on because still there's so much more that we have yet to discuss. But before we get back to the fairy Bigfoot connection, let's talk about a course that you've got going, or you're going to get going very shortly. Tell our listeners about it.
Well, in the real world, I work in education, and I am in the process right now with a fellow teacher of mine by the name of Angela Bukama. We're actually designing a nature preschool, a forest kindergarten, if you will. I'm not sure exactly how they're referred to up in Canada, but there's only one other one in Pennsylvania, and that's on the other side of the state. They're very rare here in the U.S. They're a bit in vogue in Europe, but ever since I've been a kid, I've been out in the woods, and I've learned some of the most that I've ever learned out in nature. And I think that that's a very important link for us not to forget. We're all geared up with our iPhones and our iPods and iPads and everything. And I think it's time that we step back from technology a little bit. Let's use technology as a tool and not as a babysitter, and get our children really out there. One of the reasons why I want to do this is because it does indeed teach stewardship, not only of each other, but also of the land itself. And that's extremely important. There's an old maxim that we borrow the world from our children. And I think that is true, but I think the children need to have a hand in how they're going to lend this world out. And I'm really excited about the possibilities of this catching on, and just a true wonder that nature provides to us, free of charge. And of course, Socrates says, wonder leads to wisdom. And I think that's very true. Some of my most fascinating moments in my life and some of my most memorable moments in my life has taken place outdoors. And I think that that's probably the same for you too, Rob.
That is, yes.
Yep. And I want to instill that in children because I don't think kids are really doing that anymore.
Don't take this wrong, but what is the difference between what you are going to be accomplishing and what the Boy Scouts and Girl Guides?
That's the other thing, and that's a very important connection. A lot of children simply don't have that in their lives.
Wow.
And we're talking about, a group that meets maybe 1 or 2 times a month compared to, 5 days a week for 180 days. And I think that is what I'm really trying to get in there. Also, I want to show the impact that, that we play in the world around us. One of the things that I'm trying to push for right now in the designation of this course is the idea of working with certain animals that may be extinct by the time these children graduate from high school.
Oh my gosh,
There's a species of chicken called the Dorking chicken. I don't know if you have any working knowledge of chickens.
No, I don't.
But this is a very ancient breed. I didn't either until I started designing this course. But Julius Caesar actually referenced these in his writings. So this was a chicken that was brought to England by way of Rome. And through the years, it's lost its appreciation. It's not a very large bird. It's not a very good egg layer, and it's actually at a very critical stage. And it may not be around much longer. So we're seeing an entire species of animal that probably will be extinct in the next 12 years. And I would like the children to be able to work with an animal like this to show that it's humanity's decision whether this animal lives or dies, based solely on preferences. And I want to show them that real life is in their hands, and there's an appreciation for all life. And I think that if you take that, it extends also into life as a whole, with your fellow beings on this planet as well. It's about time we start spreading a chance for peace instead of this constant hate that seems to fill the air.
Yeah, my entire knowledge when it comes to chickens can be wrapped up in 3 little alphabets. KFC.
Well, see, the thing is, my friend, I am a big chicken fan myself. That's true, and I've never raised a farm animal in my life.
Right.
But I'm trying to give these little ones, a kind of a complete working knowledge, to this kind of gestalt type of education. So, but I agree with you. That actually sounds good. I think whenever I get off here tonight, I might have to hit up the good old KFC.
No, I admire what you're doing, and it will change lives. And all we need to do, the goal of this entire show for the last 28 years, going on 29 years on air, is to make a positive difference in one person's life.
Look, tonight we talked about various topics, and some of them were, quite controversial whenever we're talking about investigation. There was no arguments whatsoever.
No, of course not.
You are not one of these shock jocks where people like to, get a rise out of people. This was a very sane conversation, and the reason why you've been doing this for such a long period is because people can understand that and they can sense that. That's the reason I cannot wait to hear feedback from this show, because I, as a writer and as a lecturer, I truly do listen to what my audience has to say, and I'm looking very much forward to hearing what their response is.
But you see, this is what communication is all about, and somewhere along the line, it was forgotten that communication is a two-way street. It's called talking and listening. And I don't know where it went wrong, but it's nice to see people like yourself and others out there who are getting back to basics and saying, hey, listen, you've got something to say, I've got something to say. You say what you've got to say, I'll listen, and then I will do the same. So there you go. Before the break, we were talking about the fairy Bigfoot connection, and I'd like to get back into that because it raised a lot of excellent points.
It does. And I think that if we look at this, let's look at it from a European point of view.
Okay.
So we have a fairy creature out there, something that, the woodwoos, for instance, their version of Bigfoot, is almost like a fairy creature. By the time we get up to the Arthurian legends, we have Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and the Green Knight is indeed this kind of mythological woodland figure covered in leaves. So we see that there's a slight evolution in this, but we're always dealing with a creature that's so a part of nature that it actually can regenerate itself with the passing of the seasons. So sometimes you see the Green Man and the woodwoos with different color hair or different color leaves to represent the winter or the fall coming around. So that's one point. We have this idea with this creature being intrinsically linked with the natural world, very similar to the fairy.
Right.
Now, by the time we get up to Shakespeare, we have in A Midsummer Night's Dream a character by the name of Robin Goodfellow, who in his play is called Puck. Now, Puck is taken from the word pucca, P-U-C-C-A, and that represents a shape-shifting creature that is part of the fairy realm. Now, linguistically, let's cross the Atlantic here, and then whenever we come to Massachusetts, there's a creature up there that inhabits the woodlands, which is very similar to a small Bigfoot in stature, and its name is the Puckwudgie. So we have the puka and the Puckwudgie with these same type of root-sounding words in there. So is it possible that this is indeed related, and this is what the creatures themselves want to call themselves, and the cultures around them kind of pick that up? It's something very fascinating to look at. But again, we see this idea of a same name crossing not only time and space, but also, cultures as well.
When it comes to the cryptozoological groups, is information shared, or does everybody hold on to whatever information they have because they don't want to share the information so that somebody else may find the smoking gun?
That's you hit the nail on the proverbial head. That's exactly what's going on. Or some people will get information, and because it doesn't make any sense to them, they will throw the information away because they thought, it's ludicrous, instead of documenting it. Some people think that all the information they get is completely proprietary. I think that information should be confidential, but never proprietary. It needs to be shared. I used to host a few podcasts, as a matter of fact, and there is so much infighting in this field, and so many people jockeying for position that I simply did not have the palate for it. I could not stand it. I'm not an assertive person. I'm not one of these people that like to be put into an argument of any kind. So I really have taken a step back, and now I let my books speak for themselves, or I'll do lectures. But this is one of the safe spots that I've had
Right.
on radio for quite some time without any kind of bickering or any kind of in-your-face confrontations. And I really do enjoy this approach very much. I think that if we are ever going to be taking seriously scientifically, that we have to be, friendly. Benjamin Radford of the Skeptical Inquirer magazine said that it's not outside forces that make the Bigfoot investigator look foolish. It is the Bigfoot investigators themselves, and that is absolutely the case. Or any paranormal investigator. There's a lot of experts out there, my friend. I know a lot about history. I know a lot about different types of sociology, and I know a lot about the mythological and the folklore approach to these creatures. But nobody is an expert on this stuff. Nobody knows if these creatures actually exist, and that's why we always have to keep an open mind. And we can never put a period at the end of any sentence that has to deal with the paranormal. It always has to end with a question mark.
Speaking about ending, my friend, you and I have to say so long for tonight. I want to thank you ever so much for your time. And Exonation, if you'd like to find out more about our guest this hour, Ron Murphy, his website is www.ronmurphyjr.com. And I'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in beautiful Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Ron, we'll have you back on in the future, so don't go too far.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, my friend.
Good night now.
Bye-bye.
We'll be back, Exonation. Don't go away.